lot of you, after reading that title, are probably thinking, Jesus Christ, how did this guy even get himself into such situations? How dumb can this guy be? It all starts with our very good friend for the past 2 years, the coronavirus pandemic. Now, I went into university in 2020, which obviously was the time when the coronavirus was kind of raging throughout the world. As a precaution, New York University decided to quarantine everyone, and as a result, even though move-in day was originally scheduled to be August 30th and 31st of 2020, they rescheduled it to, I think it was August 18th and 19th. And so I flew in on August 18th. I went in the afternoon. The thing with NYU is that they don't count the day you land as a first day. They just don't do that. It's the 0th day, and your first day of quarantine actually begins the next day. But for me, since I arrived in the afternoon, and I think a pretty good chunk of that day was spent in isolation, I consider that the first day. So technically, I spent 15 days in quarantine. Honestly, if it wasn't for YouTube, if I wasn't recording YouTube videos or editing YouTube videos, I probably would have been fried, because man, oh man, that was a pretty challenging part. You were pretty disorganized. I'm pretty sure, like some of you may be very well aware, that in the beginning, NYU had some issues with food. TikTok started blowing up. It's like, oh my God, this is the food that we're getting, blah, blah, blah. I didn't really think much about it until like the second day, when all we basically got at that point was salads. Now, to be honest, like thinking back, I pretty much missed that, because everything else afterwards, after they got such like ton of backlash, they just converted everything to Grubhub gift cards, and we just got whatever you wanted. Kind of wish I got more of NYU's meals just so I remember, like for nostalgia's sake. But man, that watermelon chicken salad, that was another level. I'm pretty full. The second quarantine is what I call the Reuben quarantine. Reuben is the name of my dorm. There was a 5-day period where our dorm, and only our dorm, went into quarantine, like lockdown, literally. This is very, very early on in the year, like 2 weeks into the school year. Things were open, the lounges were open and stuff. A lot of people would congregate in the lounge. And there is kind of a small theory for this. Reuben Hall doesn't have air conditioning in the rooms, which makes it pretty hot, especially in September when it's just raging hot. People would go to the lounge where there's air conditioning. Resulted in like 30 people accumulating in the lounge. Unfortunately, there was a positive person in the crowd. I don't think people knew about this until like the next day or whatever, and the group chat was going like wild. People were going paranoid. They were like, holy crap. Like someone shook hands with this person. Of course, that person, Patient Zero, that's like the nickname, Patient Zero's roommate, obviously was in quarantine, and then this just escalated. Like a few more people, I think, started getting positive, like just a few more people. And so guess what the dorm did? Kind of a good move, actually. They shut the whole thing down. Like the lounge, off limits, closed. In fact, we weren't allowed to come out of our rooms. It was basically the 2-week quarantine, except this time, the people who lived in the tri-state area, the only people who were exempt from the 2-week quarantine for fall, they would have to experience what we experienced for 2 weeks. Originally, the quarantine was supposed to last 3 days, except they started extending it a day and another day, and then it just lasted for 5 days. I was in a Zoom call when this happened. In the evening, at about like 8 o'clock or something, they sent us an email saying that quarantine was ended, and people just started going out. But I never made a video about that. So this quarantine on my YouTube channel never existed. My third quarantine was the spring quarantine. As the name suggests, this was the quarantine I did when I went back to NYU for the spring semester. Now this time it was a bit better. CDC said something about like, if you submit a test and it's negative, you can end quarantine early. I only quarantined for like 6 days. Since I made a video about the spring quarantine, but not the Reuben quarantine, suddenly calling it the third quarantine would be kind of weird, which is why on my YouTube channel, I referred to it as my second quarantine. Nothing much to comment more about the spring quarantine as well. I mean, we got Grubhub cards again. I think I still have several hundreds of dollars worth of Grubhub gift cards still saved up. And then I was quarantined for the 4th time in March, this time for 7 days. I call this the Boston quarantine because after my midterms ended, me and my friends went up to Boston. Really, we were very, very cautious. I mean, I've always stuck to the coronavirus rules very just easily, because like there's nothing much hard about it. To be honest, like as a side note, I don't really get why people just go crazy about wearing masks in public. It's just wearing a mask over your mouth. The people who don't understand how masks work and if they work or not, I think it's a pretty dumb concept, because I mean, it's what Asian countries do. China, Korea, when the sandstorms hit, microparticles and stuff like that, when there's like a flu or whatever, people naturally wear masks in Asia. Like that's what you usually do. And so when people were just going berserk about that whole concept here in America, I was just like, it's just common sense. But anyways, because of that, I was very used to wearing masks. Some restaurants were open for indoor dining, so we did that. It wasn't a big concern. But the problem was that coming back, one of my friends decided to eat on the train. Don't ask me how that's a good idea, yeah, but that may have been a reason why I got positive. And I was very not happy when I got the news. NYU used to conduct their tests with saliva kits, right? And I have heard that those tests can tend to be false. They can be inaccurate. And I think that's what's been the case for this case. But assuming it was an actual positive, I wasn't positive. My roommate who went on the trip with me wasn't positive as well. We were close contacts, and close contacts have to quarantine from the day we last had contact with the positive person. So we only ended up quarantining for, well, as I said, 7 days. And it was a pretty long 7 days because, I mean, who really wants to spend the week after midterms in quarantine? I really didn't like it. Like 4 times was a lot for me. After I got out of quarantine, I went to eat with a friend of mine. Literally the day after, my friend texts me, yo, I'm positive, I need to quarantine. But he forgot to list me as a close contact. And I was in literally dead concern because I was so concerned, so worried I would have to go into another quarantine literally after I just got out of my 4th quarantine. Thankfully though, his test may have been a fake, false positive because I was constantly negative even after a lot of PCR tests and saliva tests. Thank God we avoided a 5th quarantine right there. And I thought this would be the end. My school announced vaccines for students, and the day after it was announced, I went and got my first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, and I thought, oh my God, this is great. I probably don't have to quarantine again. Like, what are the chances I get positive? I just need to be careful with myself. Just don't meet anybody, basically. Don't go out in public. Don't do stupid things. And just keep calm until I get my 2nd shot or whatever. I also got my 2nd shot, and then guess what happens? My roommate gets positive. Imagine having gotten your 2nd dose and then your roommate comes up to you and says, yo, I'm actually positive. What the hell? Like, I cannot express in words how pretty much pissed off I was. So yeah, that's probably the reason why I call my 5th and last quarantine the roommate quarantine. That one was, to this day, my 2nd longest quarantine. That lasted for 11 days. The last week of school was in quarantine. And here's where it gets weird. I, who is only a close contact, not the person who got positive, had to actually quarantine longer than my roommate. Let me explain to you why. Let's say I got positive, and let's say I submitted my test on Monday. Results usually take 2 to 3 days. Let's say I got my result back on Wednesday. Let's say I opened the results and it says, you're positive. Oh my God, I am positive. What NYU says is that a positive person has started their quarantine from the day they submitted their test. So basically, if I was positive and in this scenario, in this situation, my quarantine would have started 2 days ago on Monday. However, I wasn't positive. I was a close contact. Close contacts start their quarantine from the last day of contact with that positive person, which unfortunately for me would be Wednesday. We're talking about roommates here. We spent the last, 48 to 72 hours confined in the same room, breathing the same air, sleeping in the same space. Tell me, if my roommate was positive, then I definitely would have been positive within like the first hour of me coexisting in that same space. But NYU was like, nope. And that's the sad story of how my quarantine lasted 2 more days longer than an actual positive person. And that really pissed me off, because I'm like, the reason why I'm spending my last week in quarantine is because of my roommate. Moreover, the fact that I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm forced to quarantine for 2 more days. I still don't see the logic in that. And the reason why I was even madder about the last quarantine was that roommate moves in when you still got 2 more days to go. It's pretty much taunting. When you're still locked in, your roommate just goes in and out of your room. Even though the school's like, oh yeah, positive people have antibodies. You know, the tests are pretty inaccurate. If my roommate got a false positive, he has no antibody. And the fact that my school, like employees at NYU, the COVID prevention team, was like, nah, don't worry about your roommate coming in 2 days early. He has antibodies and you'll probably be fine because of that. That was like nowhere near comforting. So I tried to like persuade the school. I'm like, guys, this is like not okay. Having my roommate move into my room while I'm still in quarantine kind of breaks the whole meaning of a quarantine. So it's not okay. I tried to persuade NYU that, but obviously they won't listen because they kind of get away with with whatever they want to do, right? Yeah, I really thought it kind of broke the whole meaning of a quarantine. Like, I'm supposed to be alone. Positive people just don't get to stroll into your room when you're still in quarantine, right? But yeah, that's the reason why it was such a bad quarantine. And so, if you sum it all up, 44 days in quarantine. And that is the story of how I spent 44 days in quarantine in my very first year at NYU. According to my calculations, there are 248 school days, or at least days when I was at school. Since I was quarantined for 44 days, that's approximately 17.7%, nearly 1/5, 20% of my first year at NYU was in quarantine. So you can definitely say that I missed out on a lot of stuff. But yeah, I think I set an unofficial record. I don't know. I mean, I don't keep track of how many times other people were quarantined. I mean, if there's anyone who's quarantined for more than 44 days, please just reach out to me because I would love to be able to empathize with our situations. But 44 days, I really feel like it's a really ridiculous record, especially considering that I never got the coronavirus. I was never positive, and yet I probably spent like 2 to 3 times more in quarantine durations compared to like the average NYU student. Thankfully though, it's been a long time since I've been fully vaccinated. NYU requires everyone who's coming next year to campus, they have to get vaccinated. Yeah, so Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, or AstraZeneca, I don't know what vaccines they accept, but I'm guessing those 4. I got the Pfizer. Yeah, you have to get vaccinated when you're entering campus next year. So situations like me, where you're not positive, but you're forced to quarantine 5 times, never happens again. And so I can gladly say that I probably set an unbreakable, unofficial record, unless there's another pandemic that forces everyone to go into quarantine again. But unless that happens, I think I hold the record. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Get me to 44 likes on this video because, well, every like equals 1 consolation. Leave those likes and subscriptions, and I will see you guys in my next video.